Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube channel, a place where gentle, profound stories are told to guide you into peaceful slumber. In our busy lives, sometimes a good night's sleep is the most precious thing, and we hope that tonight's stories will help you relax, unwind, and drift into sweet dreams. Tonight, we will embark on a special journey, full of drama yet incredibly captivating, about the Boeing aircraft of America, a story that takes us through the ups and downs of a global aviation icon. So, grab a cozy blanket, find a comfortable spot, and let's dive into this story together. Wishing you a delightful storytelling session and a restful sleep. Boeing Company is known today as the world's largest manufacturer of commercial aircraft. If we rewind history to its dawn in 1916, William Boeing was the one who laid the first bricks for this aviation giant with the Boeing Model 1 seaplane. In the same year, he founded Pacific Aero Products, the predecessor to today's Boeing. Over the course of about 25 years, Boeing grew remarkably and began acquiring other major companies into its conglomerate, such as United Airlines, now the largest airline in the United States, and Pratt & Whitney, now the leading supplier of aircraft engines in the U.S. It was only when the Airmail Act of 1934 was passed, requiring aviation-related corporations to separate aircraft manufacturing from airline operations, that companies like Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, United Airlines, and others split off from their parent conglomerate, United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. From this point, a diverse ecosystem of aviation companies across various sectors was formed in the U.S. One aspect that few people notice is that during World War II, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas were two trusted entities in the U.S. defense sector, constantly racing to produce various aircraft models, from passenger planes to weapon carriers, to supply the Allied forces or for direct use in battles, such as the Model 307 Dreamliner or bombers like the B-17 and B-29. The production and development of military equipment not only helped the Allies suppress the Axis powers, but also aided the U.S. in partially recovering from the Great Depression post-1929 by creating tens of thousands of jobs and boosting the manufacturing economy. According to statistics, before the U.S. officially entered World War II in 1940, Boeing had about 9,900 employees. But 4 years later, that number surged sevenfold to 75,000 employees. Similarly, during the Cold War, Boeing became a strategic asset in balancing power with the Soviet Union through advanced aircraft like the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, the world's first jet-powered bomber, and the B-52 Stratofortress, America's flying fortress with 8 jet engines and unmatched destructive power. After the two periods of World War II and the Cold War, Boeing gradually became a familiar partner of the U.S. government. Both sides relied on each other to grow in scale and global influence. Meanwhile, American citizens witnessed formidable, impressive military aircraft and then purchased tickets to travel comfortably and safely on Boeing civilian planes. When the Cold War ended in 1991, Boeing shifted its focus to commercial aviation rather than military, making the company increasingly relatable to the American public. The pinnacle of trust was encapsulated in a phrase passed around by Americans through decades of Boeing's aviation experience. If it ain't Boeing, I'm not going, meaning, if it's not Boeing, I won't fly. This demonstrated how Boeing's civilian aviation dominance had captured the trust of Americans and international customers after decades in the market. In the early 1990s, Boeing was a monument of safety, precision, and the pinnacle of engineering at the end of the 20th century. Any engineer working for Boeing at that time felt immense pride. Employees in other roles during this period were not only well paid, but also felt a sense of belonging to a friendly, close-knit family, where everyone, from executives to engineers, cared about the lives of hundreds of people on each flight. They all shared that heavy responsibility. It could be said that Boeing in the early 1990s was the best place to work in America. However, that era was short-lived, when Boeing was still truly Boeing. In 1997, a landmark merger in U.S. aviation history took place when Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, becoming the sole aircraft manufacturer. Nothing would have happened if Boeing's culture of prioritizing engineering and safety had spread to McDonnell Douglas. However, the opposite occurred. Henry Stonecipher, CEO of McDonnell Douglas, after the merger, took on the roles of chairman and chief operating officer of Boeing. 6 years later, he rose to become the CEO of the corporation. This news unsettled aviation enthusiasts and engineers, as those in the industry knew Stonecipher was a financial magnate with little regard for engineering. He was described as someone who cared only about the company's stock performance on Wall Street, not about safety or technical issues with aircraft. Taking advantage of the aging leadership and his political and financial acumen, Stonecipher climbed to the top ranks of Boeing. In the past, despite being a major aircraft supplier second only to Boeing, McDonnell Douglas had earned a bad reputation for prioritizing finances over engineering. There was every reason to worry about this cultural infiltration into Boeing, and gradually, those concerns became reality when Boeing introduced the most infamous aircraft in civilian aviation history, the Boeing 737 MAX. Before diving into the main content, let's talk about the aircraft that sent Boeing into a frenzy in the early 2010s. Airbus's A320neo, with larger engines than its predecessors, allowed for 15 to 20% better fuel efficiency. The A320neo created a buzz when it was launched on December 1st, 2010. A devastating blow hit Boeing when American Airlines, a loyal partner for decades, signed its first commitment to purchase 260 Airbus aircraft, including the latest A320neo. This pushed Boeing to develop an upgraded aircraft to compete with Airbus. However, creating a brand new aircraft is no easy task, requiring thousands of different tasks and risking Boeing falling further behind Airbus. The estimated cost of developing a single new design was around $10 billion. For these reasons, Boeing opted for a more cost-effective approach. They updated the 737NG, an improved version of the original Boeing 737, to create the Boeing 737 MAX, costing only about $3 billion. On August 30th, 2011, Boeing officially launched the Boeing 737 MAX, an upgraded version of the 737 model from the 1960s. Though it may sound outdated, the Boeing 737 had a decades-long development history with 3 upgraded iterations. So the 737 MAX inherited nearly all of its strengths while adding new features, expected to be a bestseller. Statistics don't lie about the 737 MAX craze. Just 3 months after its launch, Boeing secured over 700 firm orders from 9 partners. Even more impressively, before the 737 MAX first flight in 2016, Boeing had amassed 3,000 orders from dozens of global partners, making it the most ordered aircraft in aviation history. To achieve such impressive figures, Boeing promoted the 737 MAX as an engine upgraded version, offering better fuel efficiency than its predecessors and 14% better than Airbus's latest model. Additionally, longer range and a more pilot-friendly cockpit were reasons airlines believed the 737 MAX will become the centerpiece of their fleets and the future. But things didn't go as smoothly as planned. The safety record of civil aviation. Before delving deeper, let's explore the safety record of civil aviation. In 2017, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, reported no accidents involving passenger jet aircraft across 13 million flights worldwide. There were only 5 accidents involving cargo planes or small propeller aircraft, resulting in about 50 fatalities out of over 4 billion passengers across all aviation types. To date, 2017 remains the safest year in aviation history over the past 65 years. However, just 1 year later, when the 737 MAX officially entered service, 2 crashes occurred within less than 5 months, from November 2018 to March 2019, resulting in a total of 346 deaths on the same Boeing 737 MAX model. The first incident involved Lion Air of Indonesia on flight JT610, which crashed into the sea off Java 50 minutes after takeoff. Before the investigation in Indonesia could be completed, Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 crashed just 39 miles from its departure airport, killing 157 people. This was unprecedented in aviation history, especially since both crashed aircraft were the most advanced model at the time, the Boeing 737 MAX. Global aviation organizations, led by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, urgently grounded all 737 MAX aircraft worldwide. The world's most advanced aircraft was now banned, causing an estimated $5 to $10 billion in losses for airlines operating the 737 MAX. Despite financial concerns, airlines complied, parking their 737 MAX fleets in long-term storage and awaiting an unprecedented investigation into Boeing's practices. When analyzing a flight data recorder from Lion Air's crash flight, investigators noticed something unusual. The graph showing the aircraft's nose direction, with the orange line at the bottom, indicated changes caused by the aircraft's automatic adjustment system. Meanwhile, the blue line showed similar parameters but caused by human input. Notice the fluctuations in the aircraft's up and down movements. From the second half of the graph, the system automatically pushed the nose down 26 times. According to the recorded timeline, these actions occurred within just 10 minutes before flight JT610 crashed. Correspondingly, the captain had to pull the nose up 26 times, as shown by the blue graph. Just looking at these orange and blue segments, experts could understand the immense difficulty the captain faced in fighting a system they were supposed to control. Investigators in Lion Air couldn't comprehend what happened in the cockpit, as all they found was a fault in the aircraft's angle of attack sensor. Simply put, this device measures the angle between the aircraft's nose and the horizon. Although other widely used aircraft models before the 737 MAX had occasional issues with angle of attack sensors, none had caused such catastrophic disasters or exhibited the bizarre behavior seen in JT610's data. Investigators even imagined a ghost flight, where strange occurrences couldn't be explained by normal rules. Logical deductions for this tragedy hit a dead end until an email from Boeing's internal team and its 737 MAX operators surfaced. Under pressure from numerous partners, Boeing issued a notice to airlines, briefly explaining a balancing system no one had heard of before. This system was called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. It was designed to enhance the aircraft's handling characteristics. When this news emerged, pilots and aviation experts were stunned, as they had never known MCAS existed in aircraft. Even the union representing American Airlines pilots, during a meeting with Boeing, exclaimed, "The people here don't even know about that damn system, and neither do the pilots out there." That's the problem we're facing. So, what is MCAS that shocked pilots when Boeing mentioned it? First, we need to understand why this system exists only in the 737 MAX. The biggest update in Boeing's new aircraft compared to previous 737 models was its larger engines. This caused some design challenges, as the aircraft was built on the older 737 design, which wasn't created for such large engines. As a result, the original engine placement became substandard. The manufacturer had to position the engines higher and closer to the aircraft's nose than in previous models. This made aerodynamic testing more complex, with the nose tending to pitch upward more during tests. If not corrected, this could lead to a stall, a situation where the aircraft loses lift due to an excessive angle of attack between the plane and airflow. To address this dangerous phenomenon, Boeing installed program systems to lower the aircraft's nose when an excessively high angle of attack was detected beyond safe thresholds. That was the purpose of MCAS, a computer system controlling the aircraft's tail to raise it, thereby lowering the nose to stabilize the angle of attack. However, MCAS had two critical flaws that experts later deemed foolish errors by Boeing. First, MCAS was not formally disclosed to buyers or users of the 737 MAX. Boeing never mentioned its existence or included it in training manuals about the differences between the 737 MAX and other models. No one knew about MCAS until it was revealed via email after the tragic Lion Air incident. Why was this the case? Investigations pointed to one common reason. Boeing wanted to save on training costs for new features. Digging deeper into Boeing's preliminary design documents revealed an even more surprising fact. Boeing considered installing a warning light for MCAS, but concerned that it would draw attention to the system's existence, they didn't include any dedicated warning light. Instead, Boeing integrated MCAS alerts into an existing speed trim warning light. If MCAS malfunctioned, pilots would see an error from the speed trim system without knowing the specific issue. So, did pilots truly have no knowledge of MCAS from training to fly in the cockpit? Exactly. Boeing believed informing pilots about the differences between MCAS on the 737 MAX and previous 737 models was unnecessary. Even after the 2018 Lion Air crash, Boeing told the FAA that knowing the differences related to MCAS had no impact on pilot skills, knowledge, or flight safety. But is that really the case? Was knowing about MCAS so trivial? The answer is a resounding no. MCAS is an overly powerful system, but extremely prone to malfunction. On the 737 MAX, MCAS was so strong that each activation could pull the nose down by up to 2.5 degrees. This may be hard to visualize, but this figure was 4 times stronger than the original 0.6 degrees Boeing initially reported to the FAA. This increase was intended to enhance MCAS's effectiveness at low speeds, as tests showed the original setting was too weak. However, it introduced a deadly risk when operated incorrectly, as evidenced by the tragedies of flights JT610 and ET302. Moreover, The black box data revealed a horrifying detail about the power of that 2.5-degree figure. During the operation of ET-302, pilots had to exert up to 90 pounds, about 40 kilograms, of force to pull a control yoke against MCOS when it malfunctioned against their intentions. What about MCAS's susceptibility to failure? In reality, it wasn't MCOS itself that was prone to failure, but rather the angle of attack sensor, which investigators identified as faulty from the first incident. There are always two angle of attack, AOA, sensors at the aircraft's nose to provide redundancy in case one fails, allowing the other to supply information to the pilots. However, Boeing somehow overlooked the risk of AOA sensor failure and allowed MCOS to operate based on a single extreme angle of attack input. This meant that if a sensor malfunctioned and reported an excessively high angle, MCOS would still activate and force the nose down. This was clarified in the investigations of the Indonesia and Ethiopia crashes. The critical angle of attack data from the black boxes of both flights showed severe discrepancies. For JT610, during the second half of the flight, until it crashed, the angle of attack sensors consistently differed by 20 degrees. For ET-302, the 737 MAX had angle of attack discrepancies of up to 20 degrees and a maximum of over 60 degrees on both sides, persisting until the aircraft plummeted to the ground. Even more alarming about the AOA sensor issue on the Boeing 737 MAX was that over 80% of these aircraft had faulty AOA disagree warnings, alerts that should activate when the two sensors provide different values. This 80% figure was calculated before the final batch of aircraft before JT610 crashed into the sea. If this warning system had worked, if Boeing had programmed MCOS to use data from both AOA sensors or to deactivate if the sensors provided conflicting values, perhaps these tragedies, claiming over 300 lives, could have been avoided. After examining the tragedies caused by Boeing, we inevitably ask a crucial question. Who allowed Boeing to put this aircraft in the skies? Which authority should be held accountable alongside Boeing? That would undoubtedly be the FAA, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, which essentially gave Boeing the green light to fly the 737 MAX. However, not only the FAA, but Boeing itself must bear responsibility in a way no one could have anticipated. First, let's understand the FAA's role. They are responsible for all aviation products manufactured in the U.S. and ensuring their safety for operation. However, regulatory and certification agencies often delegate certain certification tasks to individuals who can represent the FAA's interests. This is known as the Organization Designation Authorization, ODA, program. In this case, the authorized individuals were Boeing's technical staff. Let's not rush to criticize this program, as it was designed to allow the FAA and other regulatory bodies to evaluate critical to highly critical items in a checklist of dozens of issues. Under normal and ideal conditions, authorized representatives are tasked with assessing low-risk, low-hazard, and pre-existing designs, while the FAA handles critical, novel, and carefully considered roles. That's the ideal scenario if the program works as designed. The risk of this authorization program arises when an authorized individual is employed by the very company they are auditing. In this case, Boeing's technical staff were evaluating their own company's products. This creates potential conflicts of interest, leading to undesirable outcomes. Specifically, when Boeing's technical staff represent the FAA in evaluating their company's products, they must balance the company's interests with ensuring near absolute safety for the FAA's interests and role. This ambiguity sometimes puts authorized individuals under pressure from both sides. If Boeing exerts greater pressure, they may overlook issues and cause errors. In reality, what happened with the 737 MAX was a shockingly lax process in an industry that prioritizes safety. The FAA, a longtime partner of Boeing, had worked together too many times. Thus, in this case, the FAA granted Boeing excessive authority to audit its own products. However, while the FAA bears some blame, Boeing must take the remaining responsibility for their cost-cutting training mentality, rushed approval processes, and overly optimistic assumptions about critical information, which made it difficult for the FAA to ensure the 737 MAX safety. For example, Boeing assumed pilots, unaware of MCAS's existence, could handle a situation where the aircraft's nose suddenly dove. However, Boeing simulated pilots took 10 seconds to address such a scenario, despite the FAA's recommendation that similar situations should take only 4 seconds. Since MCAS was audited and approved by Boeing's own staff, no changes were made after this issue. The FAA faced severe criticism from the House and Congress for its corporate communication culture and overly lenient auditing mechanisms with Boeing. Several reform demands were issued, and the FAA had to make changes following the two 737 MAX incidents. For Boeing, their culture had eroded from its roots. Boeing's culture of concealment and the company's decline, not only in the 737 MAX case, but many Boeing-related incidents could have been avoided or mitigated if the company didn't foster a culture of concealment. Consider the worst change in Boeing's over 100-year history. Since merging with McDonnell Douglas, Boeing focused on financial and profit matters rather than engineering. The image of a CEO or manager in a factory alongside engineers with oil stains was once a beautiful cultural hallmark. Now, with the headquarters moved from the U.S. West Coast to the East Coast, post-merger leadership wanted to separate production from operations so that those in suits wouldn't be bothered by those wielding wrenches. This is why former Boeing workers remarked that moving the headquarters from Seattle caused Boeing to lose part of its engineering soul. Leadership became less concerned with risks or other issues, focusing instead on when Boeing could deliver aircraft to partners. This deteriorating work environment left neither employees nor executives satisfied with Boeing's operational style. Numerous actions erupted to oppose this toxic company culture. First, the resistance came from within the company. On September 13, 2024, 33,000 Boeing employees went on strike at factories in Washington, Oregon, and California to protest the company's stringent policies on slow wage increases that fail to keep up with inflation. They demanded higher wages, threatening that 96% of employees would quit otherwise. As a result, Boeing suffered losses from a 7-week production halt, unable to manufacture any aircraft, with an estimated $9 billion evaporating due to the largest strike in the company's history. Next were the times Boeing had to face congressional hearings due to its employees. Edward Ed Pearson, a former production manager, testified before the U.S. Supreme Court at a House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee hearing on December 11, 2019. He accused Boeing of ignoring warnings about MCAS. Pearson not only spoke out about the unsafe and dishonest environment at Boeing, but also named the project's general manager, Scott Campbell. When Pearson suggested halting 737 MAX production due to unresolved safety issues, Campbell coldly responded, "The military isn't a nonprofit organization. implying that Boeing, unlike the military, couldn't delay production over minor errors, as it would affect profits. Ultimately, Boeing wasn't criminally charged for the deaths of over 340 people in the two crashes, but had to pay over $2 billion in compensation, including over $500 million for victims' families, over $200 million in court fines, and over $1 billion to airlines for the grounding period. The agreement required Boeing to adequately compensate affected parties and ensure flight safety while the agreement was in effect. However, just months before the agreement expired, in January 2024, a door blowout incident on an Alaska Airlines-operated aircraft, Flight AS-1282, brought Boeing back to court. The investigation revealed the door was missing 4 bolts after maintenance at Boeing's main factory. Consequently, Boeing faced additional fines for failing to uphold the deferred prosecution agreement. On May 29, 2025, Boeing signed another deferred prosecution agreement, requiring over $1 billion in fines to the Department of Justice, victims, and families, along with a commitment of over $400 million to invest in upgrading the company's safety systems and processes. Ironically, a company prioritizing profits like Boeing is now lagging in financial metrics compared to Airbus. The consequences of neglecting technical safety are catching up with Boeing. If you invested $100 in Boeing stock in 2019, by 2024, it would be worth only $54.66. This shows investors are losing enthusiasm for a company whose culture has eroded at its core. Looking at competitor Airbus, a simple calculation shows that with a 67.69% growth rate over 5 years, $100 invested in Airbus would now be worth nearly $170. Air travelers are also changing their views, mocking the phrase, "If it's Boeing, I ain't going," reflecting unprecedented concern about a leading global aviation company like Boeing. Boeing is in decline, gradually losing consumer trust, and needing a major internal overhaul. The aviation industry must take Boeing as a lesson to focus more on safety rather than finances. Otherwise, small dominoes like inspection processes or tightened bolts could lead to catastrophic disasters. Thank you for joining us in the story of the Boeing aircraft of America tonight. We hope the intriguing and profound details of this story have helped you relax, unwind, and prepare for a peaceful sleep. Don't forget that our YouTube channel is always here, ready to tell new stories to lull you into sweet dreams. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and hit the subscribe button along with the little bell to stay updated on our future videos. Wishing you a serene night, sweet dreams, and see you in the next stories.